Hi, welcome to this lecture on environmental adaptation of animals. On this second video on metabolism, we will already know that, how we can do ATP. We can have oxidative catabolism, we can have anaerobic metabolism, or we can store phosphate on phosphate store, or then we can store oxygen in myoglobin. And now we try to put them all together to understand how this metabolism is working in the exercise. So if you ever have run as fast you can, as long you can, you know what's fatigue. It's the feeling that, you can't anymore continue. And when I was a child, everybody was saying that, it's the lactate acid that is accumulating in the skeletal muscle and lowering the pH. So there is a must stop the work feeling. But recently it's been understood that it's actually can be also something else. For example, the glucose depletion. So there's not enough glucose, meaning that there's not enough ATP, and that caused the problem. Or then also that when the muscles are working, they are also producing heat, so the temperature can rise too much. So there's a hypothermia. And actually this lactate acid can be that it's not so bad at all. So it's just an indicator that now the cell is working anaerobically. So what happens on the ATP production during the exercise in human? First of all, what we are doing in the skeletal muscle, we are using the glycogen store. So the glucose is released from there and then used for energy metabolism. And then the glucose stores are depleted during this exercise. And after that, the glucose must be brought from somewhere else. And well, that practically means that, the liver is cutting glycogen to release glucose in the circulation, and it's brought to the skeletal muscle and used. But it also can mean that there is not enough glucose for this contractility. And beside this, also the signaling of contractility can be a problem. We have in several places there, we have calcium that is released from calcium store and then pumped back. So it can be accumulating in the skeletal muscle, and that causes that, the muscle is not working anymore. So we can have different kind of things happening. And we will discuss on, for example, in this calcium more detail few weeks later when we are having a whole week on the muscles. And then when we are thinking, what happens in the exercise? So are we using oxidative catabolism or anaerobic metabolism, etc.? We also need to know that, we have two different kind of skeletal muscles, and they behave differently. We have slow oxidative fibers and we have fast glycogenic fibers. And because one is slow and one is fast, we all know that, they are producing the tension slower or faster. But also there is a different ability to use the oxidative catabolism. And well, that's related that, these slow oxidative fibers, there's more mitochondria. And in this quite old study made in rat skeletal muscles, the mitochondria, where they are more in these SO cells, so in these slow oxidative fibers, it's near the cell membrane, so in the subcircular space, so in the surface. And there are about 2 times more these mitochondria versus in these fast glycogenic fibers. And then in the center of these cells, there's not so huge difference between these two fiber types. So if there is more mitochondria, it means that, these oxidative fibers, also called red cells or red fibers, they rely on this oxidative energy production. There's more key enzymes of this citrate cycle, and they have more myoglobin. So there is oxygen store. And because it's working all the time, it's quite difficult to increase the power in these kind of fibers. But then we have these fast fibers, that is these white muscle or white fibers. They have higher peak rate of ATP production because this anaerobic ATP production can be enhanced quite fast. And so there is a stronger contract, but also there is a fatigue quickly. So these kind of muscles can work only for a short period. So let's have an overview of what happens in the energy metabolism. So we have glycolysis producing a little bit ATP, and then we have mitochondria, and we can use the mitochondria if we have oxygen. And then we have these pathways in the mitochondria that we can use to produce a lot of ATP. But because it works only in presence of oxygen, then if we don't have enough oxygen for the muscle, then we can produce lactate from this glycolysis. And after the exercise, we can put the lactate back on the glycolysis processes, but we need oxygen and time. So which means that, okay, the lactate that is accumulating in the skeletal muscle, it takes tens of minutes in human to get rid of the lactate. And in the ectotherms, it can take hours. And beside these two different ways to produce the ATP, then we have the myoglobin that is storing oxygen. And this oxygen then can be released to maintain the mitochondria's working, to produce as much ATP as possible. And of course, this works only for short interval. And then we have these phosphogens. So we have stored this phosphate, and this can be used to produce from ADP to ATP. So we have four different ways to produce the ATP in these cells. And there is some variation. We started this section with the crayfish that was escaping with the large tail muscle. And that happens almost poorly with these phosphogens. So with releasing phosphate from these phosphogens to produce from ADP to ATP, it can flap a few times, after which the batteries are empty. But then, for example, insects, they don't use anaerobic metabolism practically at all. So they rely only on this oxidative catabolism. And then we have animals, some aquatic animals like squid, they are producing, instead of lactate, they have some octopine. Well, it's for the same kind of process. So it can be produced from the pyruvate, and then if there is oxygen available, the octopine can be reused back in the energy metabolism. So what happens during the exercises? If we check how fast someone is moving, we can predict that, okay, is it oxidative or anaerobic energy metabolism. And because we might have animals that are running very fast but very slow period, so most probably that happens without oxygen. And it can be a benefit more than one way. So for example, this lizard can run 5 meters per second. That's a very fast speed. And it can run only short distance. And they are not running just for hunting or escaping, but the males are doing for defending their territories. And because it's so fast and so short period, it's worked with glycolysis. And the interesting thing is that because they are defending these territories, Not only that, okay, those that are defending, but because they are running so fast, so the fastest runners are the best that are able to keep the territories, so they get the most offspring. So it might be that it's sometimes difficult to predict that, okay, you see fast running animal, that, okay, it's the natural selection goes because it's gets more prey, or it can escape, but actually it can be also getting more mate. Okay, what happens then if you have a physical exercise? In theory, the ATP production is increased during the exercise because the oxygen consumption is increased. It happens immediately after starting the exercise, and it then after the exercise we will reduce the oxygen consumption immediately. And well, very nice theory, but it doesn't work. So in reality, the oxygen uptake from the environment increase gradually. So in the beginning of every exercise, no matter if you are running 100-meter or a marathon, it will start by using glycolysis, phosphagens, and oxygen store. And during that period, it gives time for increasing the respiration and movement of oxygen in the circulation and oxygen uptake in your cells, etc. And after that, if it's a aerobical level, then there is a pay-as-you-go phase. So which means that, okay, the aerobic metabolism is producing as much ATP as ATP is consumed. And then the most interesting thing in this is the end. So in the resting state, oxygen consumption after the exercise, so it's again decreasing gradually. In one way, we understand, okay, if we have produced lactate in the beginning, okay, we then must use oxygen to move the lactate back in the energy metabolism. But actually, that's not the only cause, and actually that's why this green area, there is a not consensus that, okay, what's happening there? Well, that means that, okay, we are not only relying, even our humans, we are not relying on the oxidative phosphorylation. Then, what about then if we are just taking a walk or having a heavy exercise? If the oxygen consumption is about half of the maximum, there's no lactic acid accumulation. And that's why the recovery, so this excess post-exercise oxygen consumption is very minimal. Then, if we are doing heavy exercise, so over 60% of the maximum oxygen consumption, then there's a lactic acid accumulation in the start, and there's heavy breathing, meaning this exercise, post-energy exercise oxygen consumption. There's in the end, we will have a heavy breathing to get rid of the lactate. And then the third way is that we can have supramaximal exercise. So you are running as fast as you can in the ball game. So it's more than the rate of oxygen consumption. And that means that, okay, now you are doing it anaerobically with the glycolysis. But also that means that you have to be short period, because otherwise there will be fatigue. So you can only run short period with this glycolysis. And then, as you can see, these this heavy breathing season, so this green one, is very large and very long lasting. Okay, so what happens if we are running short period or long period? So we can use oxidative catabolism or anaerobic glycolysis, or then we can have these oxygen or phosphate stores. In a very short, like 100-meter run, we can rely on the ATP from the phosphagen. So actually, in the short distance running, we can do it completely without breathing. Because the energy metabolism that is on this oxidative catabolism, it's too slow to respond. Then, if the distance is longer, we have lost the phosphagen already, and then the speed is decreasing. Because then the steady state oxidative catabolism gets dominant. And because it's not working faster, so that's why we can't run so fast. Then, in the long run, then the problem is that, okay, already, actually, also the glycolysis is getting quite much in the zero. So all the ATP is made with aerobic catabolism. And in the very long exercises, actually, the ATP is produced by cutting the lipids. So we have different phases depending on how long we are running. And so in the short runs, we are using glycolysis, or actually first the phosphate. And then in the long run, the role of oxidative catabolism in the ATP production is dominant, but at the same time, the speed is decreasing. Then we can get back on something that we already had in the beginning of this course, actually. We had leopard frogs, and then we were comparing it with toad. And seeing that, okay, this leopard frog has very high lactate dehydrogenase activity. So it can fast jump, because it can produce energy much faster than the toad. But actually, it can jump a few times after which it's in the fatigue. So it's accumulating lactate, and then it can't anymore work. And similar anaerobic activity can be found in, for example, in skipjack tuna, that is running or swimming very fast. One of the fastest swimmers in the ocean. And it swims short distance. So that's what it can do it very fine with this anaerobic metabolism. But then there are also individual differences. So some people have more white muscle fibers, and that's why they are excellent swimmers. And then other ones have more slow oxidative fibers, so these red fibers that are in this picture black, and they are better in, for example, in the Tour de France. Thank you.